I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and the NBA's Final Four is set. And we've got a full recap of all of the action, as well as a full-on preview of the conference finals, as we got the Warriors taking on the Mavs, and we got the Heat taking on the Boston Celtics. NBA action is in full effect. And as we talked last time, our Game 6 picks, the last time we did this pod, I went 2-2. 2-2. We'll take it. But coming off the last series, as we add that in, we're 33-25 against the spread for the play-in/playoffs, and 45-29-1 against the spread for my NBA picks overall. We'll start out in the Eastern Conference, right? We have the Celtics and the Heat meeting in the Eastern Conference final. Not really sure how many people would have predicted that, but I also think that the Eastern Conference was the more wide open conference in terms of, there are a bunch of teams that you could have seen being in the final two. The Heat, as mentioned, dominated the Sixers in Philly in Game 6, while the Celtics, fresh off a domination of their own at home in a blowout win against Giannis and the Bucks. Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals goes Tuesday in Miami. Heat favored by 2. I know you're going to be interested in the totals. We'll talk about that for sure. I find it super interesting because I see this as being a low-scoring 90s type series, 90s basketball, maybe even some scores in the 90s. Who knows? But overall, Game 1, I'm going to say that I'm going to be on the Heat at home -2.
Okay.
I'm going to be honest, I'm not really sure which way I'm leaning here on the series. If you're forcing me to pick right now at the start of the series, I'm going to take the Heat in 7 just because the home team, and I see it being a very close series. But at the end of the day, the Boston Celtics, I think, are the better team, right? Like, I'm not confident. Like, you're forcing me to take a pick, or I'm forcing myself to take a pick for the series and give me Heat in 7, but like Celtics in 6. I think the Celtics just match up well against the Miami Heat. I want to see, like, my basketball brain, like, I want to see a game or two, see how the matchups play out before, feeling confident about a pick. But how do you see these two teams matching up? Because it's going to be a great defensive battle.
Well, first things first, you mentioned the record and you're sort of, humming and hawing a little bit there. I did some quick math on these playoffs, sir, and that record's 56.9% against the spread. And if anybody out there is listening to this bummed out about 56.9% against the spread in any way, shape, or form, it's time to find a new podcast. And I'm here to tell you, you're not going to find another podcast that's doing better than that, especially in the short term. Now, again, as far as this series is concerned, I'm with you on the Heat -2, but it is this thing where, especially in the NBA, where it's almost like a conservative play to be like, you know what, I don't really want anything to do with the series price. I, for one, I don't want to say confused, because I guess I understand it, because it agrees with you in that the Celtics are the better team. But Boston -165 for the team that's starting on the road and doesn't have home court advantage, like, that seems really high to me. And obviously very competitive, if not victorious, in the games in Milwaukee. So I believe Boston actually probably does have a better chance to win a road game than I think Miami does. Mm-hmm. And so then I go, yeah, okay, well, if I think that, then I probably should be favoring Boston. And probably it's not even that Boston's favorite. I could understand a Boston -120, -125, but to get up to the -165 zone here feels a little too high. But when I start rationalizing it by thinking about who can win a road game, et cetera, and then of course the opening game here, -2, you and I talked about, if the teams are equal, the line is going to be about -3, -3.5, right? So it implies that the Celtics are a point to a point and a half better than the Heat. And so when you look at it like that, you go, okay, I kind of do understand that. And like, this is a really short line. And so, means obviously the Celtics are a relatively high probability of winning this first game, but backing the home team, especially after Boston comes off of that 7-game series, now they go back on the road. It is sort of this thing like a wait and see approach, right? Where it's like, if Miami wins this first game, nothing really happens with the series, right? Like Boston doesn't freak out. Miami doesn't, aren't patting themselves on the back. It doesn't start that almost avalanche or that domino effect, if you will, where if Boston wins game one, we get into the psychological element of, okay, well, is Boston going to be content with getting the split on the road? And does that make Miami more viable because they're going to be, more desperate in game two and all of that sort of thing. So when we say, okay, I'm going to take Miami -2, which I, would agree with here, it is that sort of conservative type play where you're like, okay, I'm looking for nothing crazy to happen in this first game, that like, okay, Miami can win this game, cover this spread, and nothing untoward is going to, no decisions will have been made on this series. And we'll get to sort of see how the first game plays out in order to make that decision going forward. For me, you mentioned the total. We're dropping them. We're starting to drop them down here with Boston. They, another under hits. I think that's something along the lines of, I'm going to screw this up, but 7-4, I think, to the under so far in the postseason for Celtics games. And of course, you mentioned it, right? Like Miami, this idea that maybe we get a couple of games that are both teams are in the 90s. I mean, even if one team was in the 90s, that probably is good enough to hit the under here. But this number is 206.5, which is obviously quite a bit different than the Milwaukee series, which we watched go from 218 sort of precipitously down throughout the series to 213, even 212. And then obviously for game 7, we had to do the game 7 tax thing where we drop it down even further into, I believe it's 208, something along those lines. So now we're down to 206.5 because both these teams are going to grind it out here. And this is going to be that grindy side. And so I just look at it from a series standpoint, right? If the previous 2 series taught us anything, it's that when these teams head on the road or when they're at home, the supporting cast, the Grant Williamses of the world, the Peyton Pritchards of the world are going to step up. Boston's had a little bit more success doing that on the road than the Heat, obviously. And of course, I was wrong on game 6, thinking, God forbid, thinking that Philadelphia could possibly show up for an elimination game. What an idiot I am. I said never again to James Harden before, but never again when it comes to James Harden this time around. So, I just go like, I agree with you, man. I can see this being home team the whole way through. But I do see that I do feel like the Celtics have that better chance of winning that road game. Now, maybe that's just this idea that like Miami doesn't have this crazy good home court advantage. And we always talk ourselves into Boston having some great home court advantage, even though we saw them lose at home. In game 1, I believe, in the last series. So I could see this going 7. I got no problem with that. There's probably an over total games bet or a series to go 7 games prop bet in there somewhere. Yeah. That is probably worth looking at.
Yeah, I could definitely see it 6 or 7. Like you look at those over games, I could definitely see that as being a bet that I'd make. And the thing that I find interesting coming off this Celtics series is I feel like it's not being mentioned enough how big of a deal it was that Milwaukee gave them such a good go without Chris Middleton. And I don't know if it's because Chris Middleton's name isn't because he's not a household name. So people don't fully grasp like how good he is, or even if he's not a household name, just what he means to that team. Right. And there was a lot of Grayson Allen minutes. And if you're telling me that, you're replacing Grayson Allen minutes with someone who is just twice as good as Grayson Allen, like, do you know what I mean? Like, forget whatever name the person is. Right. I'm just saying the thing that's throwing me off about Boston is, they played well. It was a great series. It was back and forth and could have went either way. And, maybe Milwaukee just ran out of gas, whatever cliche you want to use for what happened to Milwaukee in that game 7. But I'm just, the thing that's throwing me off here and the thing that's making me hesitant about taking the Celtics is, okay, well, why did you just struggle so much against Milwaukee without Chris Middleton? Like, that seems so strange to me. And I'm not making the excuses for Milwaukee for losing, because we know injuries happen in the NBA. We see it each and every single year. So that's a thing, like, no excuses. But I'm just kind of thrown off about, okay, well, is Boston, like, do they have the championship, like, all this, the extra stuff, the cojones, to like get there and get through? Because Milwaukee could have won that series very easily without Middleton. And that's weird to me. Like, if you remove Jaylen Brown off the Celtics, how well do they do in this series? Sure. And I know Giannis is a beast. Get that. Totally understand it. But it's just, I don't know. I don't know. Like that's what's making me hesitate about taking the Celtics in this series. But I guess the question then becomes Milwaukee without Middleton. How do you compare that team to the Heat?
Yeah.
Right. And it's
because
like,
we talked about how there's like Milwaukee has 2 good players and Boston has 4 because Al Horford stepped up in that big way. But I look at Tatum and it's funny, right? Like everybody's going nuts about Tatum because he was obviously amazing in game 6 and but you still go like, yeah, there was still a game in that series where my guy had like 10 points or whatever it is, it was, right? Like this isn't like a consistency level type of thing. This is more like a high end level type of a thing. And so whereas with Miami with Jimmy Butler, I feel like you're not going to get that bad game from Jimmy Butler, right? Like he's bringing it every single night. But I do look at the Heat and I go, is it just him and Bam? And like, are we going to get into the same spot where it's like 2 guys against 4, again, assuming Horford's really good and assuming Marcus Smart is really good. So that again, like sometimes it kind of is that simple. And it isn't because they have lost a guy due to injury. It's just because like the team's kind of just built on the periphery in a lot of ways, right? Like Oladipo isn't that guy. Lowry isn't that guy anymore, right? Like they're trying to kind of piece it together. I don't want to say for like one last run, so to speak, but like they're like, okay, let's get some veterans here to kind of like, fill in the cracks here, but not be that third guy.
Yeah, the big part for Miami, right, is they need Tyler Hero to be what they think Tyler Hero is. And he wasn't, or he hasn't been so far. Well, he wasn't against Philly, right?
Yeah.
And to make the NBA Finals, they will need that bubble version of Tyler Hero to come back. Now, then we get into this whole concept of, okay, well, is he that guy or is he just another one of these like role guys where, okay, at home, he'll give you a couple games, he'll play kind of solid, but on the road, who knows what you're going to get? That's going to have to be Jimmy just like doing everything, like in that series against the Sixers where Jimmy's posting up Embiid to get buckets because there's no one else to score on the Miami Heat. So that's the part that's going to be interesting here, right? Because you mentioned Jimmy's going to have to play defense in this series as well, right? He's either, I'm assuming he's going to be one of the bodies they try to throw at Tatum, right? With PJ Brown, but even if he's not guarding Tatum, then you're guarding Jaylen Brown. So PJ Tucker is going to be a thing in this series. I know. Did I say PJ Brown? I think I said PJ Brown, right?
You dropped a PJ Brown, which for anybody of a certain age was like, oh man, I like, honestly, you could sell me a PJ Brown having signed like a mid-level exception towards the end of the season, like a buyout type deal. I'm pretty sure he did that towards the end of his career
with the Celtics. Totally with the Celtics.
Maybe he is going. I don't even know.
So PJ Tucker is what I meant, right? So you have PJ Tucker and Jimmy. You assume they're going to split most of the assignments between Brown and Tatum. But if Jimmy has to do that and also has to score, that then you really need, all those threes from Max Strus, right? You're going to need Tyler Hero. You're going to need Oladipo. You're going to need Bam to like dominate that big guy matchup against Al Horford. And who knows what Robert Williams is at. He hasn't played in the last couple of games. I think he dressed last game, but kind of was like an emergency type thing. Like, we don't really want to play you, but if like, ish hits the fan, we'll sub you in, but
break glass in case of emergency player.
Exactly. Right. So that's really where this series comes down to. Kyle Lowry, I don't think you can actually rely on getting too much from him as he's been hobbled in this series, and having to run around and play a physical series against Marcus Smart probably isn't the best way to heal a hamstring injury. I'm pretty sure that's what he was dealing with.
Right.
So I don't know. This series is going to be super interesting. And that's what I mean. I want to see what happens after game 1, just to see how the matchups work, to see what the strategy is going to be. What did Miami learn from Milwaukee? Because a big thing from the Milwaukee side, when you pay attention to that, is their game plan was, we're going to pack the paint, we're going to stop the drives, and we're going to give you threes. And when the threes went in for Boston, everything was great. And we talked about this from game 1, right? After game 1 of this series, we talked about that. And then you end up in game 7 where your man's Williams is just bombing threes. I think he took like 13 threes he attempted or something like that.
15 or something. Yeah.
But that's ridiculous, right? But he's wide open and you have to kind of shoot that. So what is Miami's game plan going to be? Is it going to be much of the same? Let those guys shoot. And if they hit them at home, we have more home games. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm super interested in this, but I feel like this is also a series that the generic basketball fan might not actually like, because it won't be the like high flying running gun, up and down series. Yeah, that's my take.
So I'll put this to you. Let's give you a homework assignment here, right? Because coming into these series, when you look at, first of all, we got one game a night. So you're going to be locked in just the one game. There's no like, okay, I got to lock in for 6 straight hours here, or, having overlap or anything like that. Let's try to find out after game one or throughout game one, like where are the prop markets that we can sort of take advantage of based on matchups, right? Like whether it's even rebounding, assists, something along those lines. Let's have a real strong, like hard look at these first games well, let's see. What's this first one's on Tuesday?
Yeah.
So Tuesday and then Thursday. So we only have one game between now and the next time we speak. Like, let's try to figure out matchup wise where we can kind of take advantage of the prop market, because I think like at this point, we always talk about it with regards to football season and some of these sort of, high profile type sporting events. The line for the game is always going to be really, really tight, right? Like -2 is a fair line. There's probably nothing crazy there. As I just looked at the total, I wrote down 206.5 from last night upon open. It's already down to 204, right? That line went 2.5 points. So the good news is, got a pretty good beat on where the line should be. Yeah. The bad news is too late as far as getting the best of the number when it comes to the total, but we don't have any prop bets up yet. Worth mentioning +210 for this series to go 7 games. Doesn't matter who wins, just as long as it goes 7 games, +210 for that out there.
I like that.
So I'm looking at game one going like, okay, what about these matchups are we going to be able to take from game one to bet into game 2, 3, 4, and so on?
I'm looking at Bam. Bam is a big thing for me here, because if he is able to dominate that center matchup with either Horford or Williams, and I mean, Williams is hobbled, so either way, I would hope that Bam should be able to win. Like if he is, again, I'm looking at Miami and I'm saying the same thing I said about Hero. If you are who we think you are, Bam, this is where you come out as, a top big guy in the league, and you dominate your matchup. You control the glass, you control the paint. So I'd be looking at props for, things like blocks or things like Bam rebounds, because he should be able to dominate that matchup. Al Horford, what he was able to do in that first series, cool. But look at the matchups, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about Brook Lopez, who's mostly playing perimeter, right? You're looking at him guarding the paint in that wall that you're building against Giannis. It's just a very different type of defensive assignment, defensive matchup. If you think about whoever would be guarding them, they're kind of floating because so much more attention is being paid to Tatum and Brown and the 3-point line, which opens things up for, Horford to have. And hey, credit to him for stepping up. Cool. Yeah. But now Bam is supposed to be a focal point of the offense. Can he dominate that matchup? He'll get the ball at the top of the key and just trying to go downhill consistently. That's what I'm really interested in seeing how Bam Adebayo does, and that will be key. The other thing would be Tyler Hero. Tyler Hero, I think, has to know that his role in this series, you got to come off the bench and cook and get buckets. So if it's threes from Tyler Hero, you're looking at something like, I'm not sure what the line is or if there is a line already out for Tyler Hero threes for game one, but I'm looking at if it's like 2.5, 3.5, something around there.
Yep.
If they're going to win, he has to go over. Right. Yeah. So it's like things like that would be the two main things that I look at from the Heat standpoint. From the Celtics standpoint, Jason Tatum's points, just because I think everything's going to be on the under, I would look for Tatum's points to be on the under as well, because Miami is going to put him through the ringer, and it's going to be a grind for him to get buckets. And we've seen this before from Spo being able to draw up, that defense where they're playing man-to-man, but it's really kind of a zone at the same time. Yeah. So I'd look at Tatum unders. So I guess, Tatum unders, Bam over in terms of rebounds, blocks,
and maybe some
like
Horford under too, right? Because you mentioned like
Yeah.
that was a super comfy matchup because like Lopez over the course of his career has like become this perimeter threat or however you want to sort of play it. It's like, well, that's Al Horford. And so Al Horford's looking, it's almost the Spider-Man meme, only like it's not Spider-Man and Spider-Man, it's Spider-Man and like whatever's less than Spider-Man, me, you know, I don't know. Like he's just, you know, it's Al Horford, but like worse when it comes to Lopez, right? Well, now you get Bam, and like that's not going to be that matchup. And so like there's probably a reason why Al Horford looked 10 years younger throughout this series in certain games, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that we're going to see that this time around. Now, is his number going to be inflated to the point where he's, you know, like 14 and a half or something from a point standpoint? Like, I don't think so. So like, it might not be like the greatest sort of, you know, value that we'll ever see, but it's something worth looking at in that series.
The one last thing I want to just say about this series that has nothing to do with gambling. I'm sorry, the series that just happened between Milwaukee and Boston has nothing to do with gambling, but a lot of the narrative that people are talking about is about how the last day of the regular season, the Boston Celtics started all their players and won, and the Milwaukee Bucks sat all their players and lost. And obviously we just saw that the second round matchup ended up being Celtics getting home court advantage because of that decision. The part that all these NBA people are leaving out, and it's probably on purpose because you don't want this to be the focus, is that part of the reason why Boston was so focused on winning, well, two things. Milwaukee was focused on losing because they didn't want to play the Nets in the first round, right? Like, do you want to play the Nets in the first round or do you want to play the Bulls in the first round? So they were like, okay, we're cool to lose. The thing from the Boston standpoint was they couldn't really mess around with losing because if they fell to 4, they would have been Philadelphia, and they have players who are unvaccinated. So we saw that Matthias Thybulle wasn't able to play against the Raptors. And if that's Jaylen Brown not being able to play games in Toronto, like that's the actual reason why the Celtics were going for the 2 seed. Everyone's trying to turn this into they tried their best on the last day of the season. And now, you know, having the matchup in the second round, that's why you play right to the end so that you get home court advantage in a potential second round.
I did that.
No, but
I said it, right? I was like, I was
watching TNT and that was Ernie's whole on camera, right? And I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's true. That's true. But like, there's also another side to all this that was probably a way bigger deal, right? Like, do we have Jaylen Brown for half of the series if we have to play the Toronto Raptors? That is a massive, massive deal. But yeah, story for another day. Congrats to the Boston Celtics, who are riding this wave of being the best team in the NBA since Christmas, and now find themselves in the Eastern Conference Finals. And maybe not a place that most people would have predicted them to be at the start of the year.